Welcome to In the Demo, a show about the stories that get told about groups, how those stories got made, what we think those stories get wrong, and why it matters. You hosts? Farrah Bostic is the founder and head of research and strategy of The Difference Engine, a strategic insights consultancy focused on helping business leaders make decisions. Adam Piano, author and brand consultant and managing director of brand strategy at Arizona State University. You are now in the demo.
Do it live.
Woo!
Wow. You really do work at Arizona State.
I bring the energy wherever I go.
You do. You do. You bring
Nobody's
that
gonna bring
little
it
girl
for you.
energy.
Yeah. Yes, that's the exact energy I bring. Consistent with my personal brand that I've been cultivating for years.
So as we were talking about what we wanted to talk about, the meta conversation, the before the show conversation, what did we want to talk about? Why did we want to talk about it?
Well, I think as you and I have been looking at all the stories, the content, the research that's been going on for 28, 30 years, one thread that we've pulled at, and we did talk about it in one of the episodes in season 1 for millennials, is this idea of the workplace as this carve out of areas of research. And now what you and I have noticed is that we've moved on from millennials in the workplace to the next dreaded scourge of the workplace, Gen Z. So
Yes.
as Farrah Bostic would say, ever was it thus? The next generation is always like, oh no, those people. And those articles are written usually by people 2 generations ahead. So if it was boomers commissioning the research about millennials, then I'm assuming it's people like you and I commissioning the research in Gen X about this Gen Z group. And the conversation I wanted to have with you is compare and contrast the how big of a scourge we look at Gen Z as versus the way millennials were presented, which took turns, as we've discussed pretty deeply, from they're going to be our saviors, they care about all the right things, and they are going to save the day, to, oh, these guys, there's 70 million of them, and they have expectations for their own life, and they have values that they want to be upheld for them.
Yeah, I think the thing that is standing out to me about it is there does not appear to have been much of a honeymoon for Gen Z at much of a point in time where it was like, they're going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I think you hear more of that in like political commentary and analysis. And even then, I think it's like there's a piece we should at some point talk about that was put out by one of the data reporters at FT showing young people stratifying on gender based on sort of political affiliation and doing so kind of globally, across several countries.
What an interesting article that was.
Yeah, it's again, as the person who's like, well, let me check your work. Like,
It's imperfect, yeah, but
it's imperfect, and then the characterizations in the tweet thread that accompanies it, which is like, this slide is remarkable, and it's like, it's a signal. Is it remarkable? Is it amazing? Is it like shocking? I don't know.
I said interesting. That's as far as I got.
Yeah, I mean, most of those time series charts, I just look at it and go, all of this can be explained in the UK. This can all be explained by Brexit. In the US, all this can be explained by the 2016 election.
100%.
And so, like,
you can see the hard pivot on, for a date.
Yeah, and guess what? It affected young people too. So okay, but the degree of sort of like at the ready negativity about Gen Z does feel symmetrical to the negativity about Gen X, that it may not be the same kind of slacker narrative, but it is nevertheless a lot of concern that they don't have what it takes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Millennials in the beginning had what it takes and then lost it along the way.
Yeah,
But
when they
like,
started asking for raises.
when they started asking any questions at all, I think is when it turned bad for the millennials. But the stuff that I've been seeing is just this, like, I mean, it is moral panic levels of hysterical writing about Gen Z.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I always enjoy talking to you is because we have a different entry point for all these conversations. So you always spark some other idea that I never had before, which is if boomers commissioned and wrote the original pieces about millennials, and those all started glowing, but then ended with loathing, which to me kind of reflects the millennial self opinion, then, or the boomer self opinion, then Gen Xers doing the same to Gen Z makes total sense because they didn't start with that honeymoon period because Gen X has been trained and widely reported to be cynical and apathetic and not give a hoot. And it just started with like, they're meh, same as we were. You know, and now it's getting deeper into, I have all these studies that I've pulled for how exactly are they meh, but it's kind of like, yeah, they, you know, they never were going to be the saviors or turn things around, or we can rely on this group to bail us out of all these problems.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that that history explains a lot about these, like, you know, like I said, if I look at those time series charts and can say, well, also a big thing that happened in 2016 was, you know, a major upset in the UK or a major upset here. You know, in South Korea, like something clearly happened in 2010. I'd have to go back and figure out what it was. I do remember that there were widespread youth protests in South Korea in like the 2010, 2011 period. And I only know that because youth activists were organizing on discussion boards that were actually dedicated to a boy band.
Oh, yeah.
And so there were people who would turn up at protests and say, I'm only here because of the boy band. Like,
and that's
how I got connected to this movement.
Yeah.
And so, like, there was political unrest happening there anyway. And so, like, is it something that changed about young people? Well, it's something that changed about Korean politics. But in any event, like, one of the things that I think about with these kind of historical moments is like, Gen X, I mean, the first wave of Gen X is, you know, coming into high school in the Reagan years. And so this is often like a perfectly reasonable way to explain why Gen X is like the last of the generations to be like 50-50, maybe even slightly leaning Republican from the jump.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they sort of politically came of age under the Reagan era. And so that was who was president when you could vote for the first time. And there's some interesting kind of parallel discussions going on about particularly like Gen Z men coming of age politically and being, you know, being more likely to think that Trump is normal because he was president when they started paying attention to the news.
Yeah.
And so, like, what do you have to gauge it against? Nothing. Right? But there was also this kind of, the economy was weird in the early 80s. And frankly, all throughout the 80s, the economy was weird. There were parts of it that were doing well. The early 80s had really high interest rates. They were coming off the 70s malaise, blah, 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 blah. And so we kind of take all of these economic conditions and assume that they are like transmitted via the amniotic sac into these babies and they will receive it and it will be core to their psyches for the rest of their lives. And maybe that's true. I don't know.
I feel like it's not true. I'm not a scientist.
You don't think that's how it works? It's not coming through the
I'm going to run this back to the biology team here at ASU and see what we got.
That'd be great. And I think that, you know, the millennials are coming of age at the end of history. Like, it's all up and to the right. Everything's going to be great. So of course they're going to be great. They're coming of age at the time where greatness is just a given.
Yeah, and it's a hockey stick with 10 years.
Yeah. And now let's just be real honest about how things have been for the last 4 or 5 years. Like,
not so good, Al.
It's been a rough ride. Yeah. And so why would you then want to spin a story? How could you credibly spin a story to people coming into or just out of college that, like, your life's going to be amazing. You're going to rock this thing. You're going to be richer than your parents. You're going to buy a house at 22. You're going to be married by the time you're 25. You're going to knock out 2-3 kids before you're 30. It's going to be great, man. Like, you are going to be at the top of your game for the rest of your life. It's a bullshit story. No one's going to believe that.
Yeah, the Norman Rockwell American dream is not something that people are trying to pitch or that people are receiving either.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like also true to the moment. It feels like it is not merely like, all right, it's going to, things are going to continue trending more or less the way they have for 40 years. It's like, oh, things aren't good. But the other thing that we always want to do is both like chase, marketers want to chase around young people and get their dollars in the mistaken belief that this will be like a lock for the rest of their lives. They start buying this detergent now, they'll buy this detergent forever. It's not how anything works, but we like to pretend. And then the other thing we like to do, chase them, worship them, pander to them, all of those things, and then blame them for everything.
Oh no, we got to bake in the negs up front that we're gonna. Here's the ways we're gonna blame them. We're gonna drop these seeds now, so that later on we can be like, we told you.
We need to do a whole episode that's basically how the way the media covers generations is straight out of the pickup artist playbook.
I bet you we could do a 1-to-1. I like it. It's not even complicated.
I bet it's not. It would require me reading the pickup artist.
Oh,
playbook.
like you didn't read it. I saw you with your giant top hat. That's a deep cut for people who didn't have VH1 in the early 2000s. Hey,
Google it.
We'll link, I'm sure. I had another idea for a topic, which I think we've talked about in the past but haven't done, is on that idea of loyalty, long-term generational loyalty for brands. And also, I think we could weave in political parties and other affiliations. It's like,
if we do that, we have to address the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, is the NFL bad now? Is the relationship between Travis and Taylor an op? And it's just like,
I don't want to.
The NFL is scripted. This is a psyop to convert young women to be Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some cool like fever dream stuff going on the right that feels like, I mean, for one thing, it's like, really? You're going after football? Football is the thing you now want to question.
I know.
Like, this is a guy who just like gets paid millions of dollars to play a game. And I'm like, okay, first of all, that's a scene from Ted Lasso.
Right.
And second of all, since when do you guys not like football players?
No, I have this foreshadowing of Ben Shapiro calling out and begging for a player to take a knee before a football game. In protest of the psyop. I mean, everything is upside down.
Everything is upside down. But, my husband Stuart had a really great insight into this, which is that it's actually like a really interesting experiment. Like what they're trying to do is see if they are powerful enough to take down football. Like,
I have some
it's
news.
not really like liking football, not liking football. It's like, are we big and strong and powerful enough to take down this enormous brand and collection of brands and tradition and part of the American identity, I guess.
And most of our Sundays, like 19 Sundays in a row, like I have some news. You're not. Yeah.
Well, but you got to hand it to them. They're trying.
I don't know.
I also want to pause here and say, Stuart and I did discuss, was that merely an observation? Was it a take? And I said, no, it had elevated. It was, in fact, an insight. And I don't give that designation lightly.
You don't drop that word.
No.
Okay. So is that the tiers?
Mm-hmm.
Is take below insight? So when I'm presenting a deck of strategy, should I have like, here's some takes? I've never pitched them that way.
I mean, Adam, I don't believe that you deliver a lot of takes, but I have seen a lot of strategy decks that just have takes.
I'm a take machine.
You're a take machine.
Got lots of takes. Takes are easy. If I even knew that was an option. All of my presentations from now on will be conducted like sports podcasts, where I can just be like, I got a take. Your customers, they're not loyal. Here's a chart. Anyway, speaking of charts. So I started. Do you like that segue? I'm a master.
I do. That was really good.
Yeah. So I know you pulled some things. I pulled some things as we do. And before I even started digesting all the tabs that I opened, Google autocomplete is my friend. And so if you type in Gen Z work and then you watch what populates, a lot of times that auto-populate tells the story for you. And it is all about workplace, work-life balance, workplace dynamics, workplace ethics, workplace values, approach to work. I mean, it's all these things about that get really to a very specific place that is an echo of the Gen X story, where for boomers, it was, the old school American dream of, I think it's such a trope now that, go to work for Siemens, you work there for 30 years, you get your gold watch, you retire, you move out to the country, the whole thing. And for Gen X, it was like, oh, these guys, they're wearing khakis and short sleeve shirts and they want to leave at 7. This is insane. Who are these nuts? And now in a lot of the articles that I'm reading, it is Gen Z, number one, almost exclusively juxtaposed against millennials. And then number two,
so we're not lumping them together anymore. We're pulling them apart.
Well, it depends on which serves their narrative better. I have a study from Deloitte from, I think, November 2023 or September 2023. And on each alternating slide, there will be like youth together, which is everybody 20 to 40, and then just youth. And then on the next slides, it'll show them one generation versus the other. There can only be one. But this idea of work-life balance, workplace ethics, sharing salary and visibility, transparency, that's a really important piece as well. And it's like, I manage Gen Z. You can Google my salary. Like I have no problem with it. It's okay. It's not a lot.
What are they calling it? It's like loud money or something?
Loud budgeting.
Loud budgeting.
And why does everything have to have a volume now? If people quit, it has to be quiet.
It's quiet. But if they're budgeting, it's loud.
Yeah. Do you want to explain loud budgeting?
Life is just like Seinfeld tropes now. He's a close talker, he's a high talker, he's a low talker, he's sponge-worthy, he's whatever. Like all of those things. He's a loud budgeter. He's a loud budgeter, he's a quiet quitter.
Yeah. You know that guy.
It's a hot girl summer. It's, girl math.
Was it White Boy Fall? Was that what it was? Chet Hanks? Remember this?
Isn't it always?
Kind of. It has been for 200 years.
Yeah. Every couple of years, it's White Boy Fall. That's what I'm going to call the elections now.
Hey, there were 8 years that don't apply. Plus a couple years where Jesse Jackson got like 2% of attention in the primaries.
Fair. And, there was a white woman involved once.
One time. It was enough. You're referring to Geraldine Ferraro, of course, in that 84.
I am. Shame about her husband.
Yeah. Another deep cut.
Yes. Shame about her husband is also pretty much the thing you could say about almost every woman who runs for president. Sample it too, but shame about her husband.
At least we're amusing ourselves today. Listeners are like, I'm not sure. I'm going to fast forward till they talk about branding again. I don't understand.
So Allison, our editor, I was talking to her last week, and she did say that some of the shows that she edits are very, very straightforward, very, very dry or something. She didn't use those words. She was very nice about it.
She said,
but she did say that we seem like we're having a good time.
Oh, I think we're having a good time. I know you wouldn't show up if you weren't having fun. Life's too short.
That's true.
And we're talking about nerd shit. Like, what else do you want?
I don't know.
Right?
Anyway, carry on. I interrupted you with jokes.
How dare you? How dare you? You know I love them jokes. Can we start by talking about identity? So I'm really going to lean on this Deloitte study. So the study is all about the workplace. It is not a total generational examination, but they do start with this relationship between identity and workplace. And you can see, I think this is interesting, and this is one chart on the left there, percentage who say the following are most important to their sense of identity. I would actually like to see that broken out by both. I would like the addition of Gen X and Boomers, and I would also like gender splits for that. I think that would be make this much more interesting, but I still think it is interesting. You could see that millennials are more likely to assign friends and family and work as most important. And I think that's probably a statistically significant difference between Gen Zs and millennials on that work differentiation. So
what's the age of Gen Zers included in this?
Oh, let's go up and look. I think they said born in 1997.
So they're okay, but where are they kind of cutting it off? Anybody who's under 18, probably, right?
Oh, you're giving them a lot of credit that you think they gave us a definition.
I mean, so sort of standard is you don't survey people much under 18 because it requires parental consent and triggers a whole bunch of ethical issues.
Yeah, it's not immediately available, and I have to go back to the appendix.
So one of the things that's interesting about this, we did a study a few years ago about decision making, and people talked about who they turned to for advice when making big decisions. And the younger they were, the more likely they were to say things like anybody but colleagues or bosses. Right. So it would be parents, siblings, professors or teachers, clergymen, like they'd have just about anybody else because they're not at work yet.
Right.
They're still in school. And so this is one where I also feel like that's a good number to track. And the thing I'd be interested in with the millennial number is what did it look like at the same stage for millennials? So whenever that would have been probably like 2000 to 2008 or something. And what would surveys that ask the same question of millennials at that point in their life have said or looked like? Would it be different for them there? Because one of the things I think that is always a challenge in comparing generations is they are not at the same point in their lives.
No.
Right? And so
you can't
it
ask
tells
them
you
point
like
in time now. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. It's always like what's important to you in your 20s, what's important to you in your 30s, what's important to you in your 40s. Those things shift inevitably. How much they shift might be more of a generation effect. But it is interesting that
but I still think the work, just reverting. So just to answer your original question, I did find the methodology. Gen Z was born between January 1995 through December 2004. And millennials born between 1983 and 1994. So they're taking like a similar chunk.
We're never going to standardize these, are we? So millennials are now 83 to 94?
Yeah. And
I was told it was like 80 to 96 or 82 to 96.
How
am I supposed to do a segmentation? How am I supposed to do the next segmentation for my brand that I do almost constantly?
People are waiting anxiously for the newest one.
That's all they do. They just sit around waiting.
I'm just sitting around.
Can't do anything until I tell them what the millennials think this time.
And I want it to be a generational segmentation. If it's not 50 to 70 million people, like, is it even worth anything?
No.
Barely.
No.
So I had the same thought about that life stage component versus the period effect. And I wonder if, adding my own anecdata to it, when I was 20, my career identity was everything. Like, I thought being an art director was the best. Like, that was my aspiration. It was my identity. It's all my thinking was about it. All my conversations were about it. I think people probably outside of advertising found me very boring because it was that's how I represented myself. It was like, oh, that guy's an art director, Ugh. So I'm interested to see that the Gen Z sample said work is like this. This is telling to me. This feels different than my experience. What about you? What's your thought about it?
I mean, I think I was similar, but I was also, trying to be a copywriter, a total nerd for the advertising industry. But I had a lot of friends that work was just a place they went during the day that gave them a paycheck. Like it was not their identity. And maybe some of this also was like in my early 20s, I was living in LA
Mm,
where everyone was trying to be something other than what they did for a living.
right.
Like, and so now I don't know. Would they have still with the waiter who's, with the waiter actor, you know, model bartender still say work was important to their sense of identity if they're not a working actor or a working model? I don't know. Maybe they would.
Yeah.
But I do think that's an interesting difference anyway, that like it's an interesting, there is probably there's probably some insights in there, and I hate saying insights, but there's probably some insight to be gleaned from that about their kind of. I mean, so I'll share my own anecdata, which is not based on people who work in advertising. We do work in the higher ed space, and we talk, and these are frequently people who would be the first in their families to go to college. They are certainly not definitely college track people. And when we talk to the people who are in that set that are in like 18 to 24 age range, they are not really talking about like, I want to be an X. They're like, I want to get a job that's stable and makes, and it pays me enough to be
Hmm.
able to have a nice little place to live and have a family.
Hmm.
And so the work part is a means to an end, and the end is not the work identity. So I wonder if some of this is also class inflected, that those of us who are going to go into kind of fancy white collar jobs have more of an identity attachment to the work than people who are like, I just want to have a nice, stable life.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm also glad you brought up LA versus the East Coast because
Mm.
this study covers something like 44 countries. It's not all US based.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's gonna change things pretty dramatically as well.
Hmm.
But they still refer to like pretty Americanized concepts in here, such as you'll see the lead before that chart says, while much has been written about quiet quitting, nearly half of Gen Zs and the majority of millennials say their job is still central to their sense of identity, as if like quiet quitting is an actual thing and there's some measurement of how pervasive it is in any generation. It's like it was like a Axios meme about people being pissed at work and trying to like take it easy for a couple days.
I mean, yeah, that whole story is also, there are a lot of stories right now that are actually sort of reflections of what is actually a pretty good economy, right? Like quiet quitting is a thing you can do when you're pretty sure you're going to find another job because the unemployment rate is so low.
Yeah.
It's a thing you can do. It's also, yeah, it's also like the desire of these media outlets to go find a thing that has 150 likes on a hashtag and call it a trend. So
Right.
um yeah, much has been written about it, that's true. But it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what people are really doing. And it was never clear what quiet quitting was it in fact people leaving their jobs and just like not telling anybody? Because the ghosting thing, that feels like that's something that HR companies are like, this happens more than it used to.
Yeah.
um but the quiet quitting could have just meant like, I'm taking it easy today versus I'm on the full hustle all day long every day, grind, grind, grind. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I think it's also interesting that, their cast on this is it's still almost half of Gen Zs who associate their identity with work. That's pretty good, pretty big proportion of people globally. And also people who are not entirely in the workforce yet.
Right. 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 Well, that's the other piece is not only are we talking about life stages, but part of that life stage is people that are still in college.
Yeah.
They probably don't have a strong work identity.
But I would be very interested to see, how does Gen X stack up on these?
Yeah, I think that would really enrich this.
Because it might give you more sense of like, is it about life stage? Is it some sort of cohort effect? And that might be something that would be easier to tell comparing two different groups of people. It would also be real nice if everyone would just pick one standard definition of the years in which everybody in a generation was born.
No, I don't want that.
Okay.
It's half the fun is figuring out like who are we actually talking about. Oh, this what you're describing is 20% of what Pew used to describe as millennials.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird.
It is weird.
Where do those other definitions come from, do you think? Like, why break it differently?
I think if we go back to Millennials Rising, theirs was a pretty simple, they have their own kind of structure of saying the generations are about 21 years long. That's not quite true of boomers, who are census defined as 46 to 64. But everybody else, but that's like 18 years, right? So that sort of 18 to 21 year span is more or less what the authors of Millennials Rising tried to stick to as they talked about generations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the problems, and we talked about this with Kim Parker, the problems are if you don't have obvious like demarcations in the birth rate data to say this was a cluster of time when a whole bunch of people were born,
Right.
then you have to start doing something else. And so you start picking like, well, do we want the first ones to be just turning 18 in 2000? Because that's how they're like, are we working back from the name we gave them? like we decided to call them millennials. So would they really be millennials if they were already like 20 when the millennium happened? Like these are dumb like media questions. I think there's also been a lot of noise made by my fellow exennials who want to be taken seriously as a separate cohort. And so like, well, how are we going to carve that out? Like, when's the last exennial? I find it personally offensive that anyone born after 1980 or 81 wants to be an exennial, but whatever. I'm sticking by my, 1980 to 1999 or 98, 99, 2000, pick one. I don't really care. But like 80 makes sense to me. It is like they're kind of and this is the other part of it, right? Is the cultural bookends thing is, Are we trying to kind of have them hit a particular age by a particular milestone in culture or in the economy? And so I think this is also why we're haggling over what's Gen Z and why we will continue to haggle over what's Gen Alpha. Like some people who are currently being called Gen Alpha will eventually be called Gen Z and possibly vice versa.
Hopefully we could just keep debating that until the end of time. So
yeah, but the thing about it is to be a fly on the wall of these meetings where they decide how they're going to set the boundaries. Like, are they looking it up and seeing how someone else did it? Is this like a recursive problem that everybody's just, it's arbitrary decisions all the way down? Yeah, probably. But like, how do you, a pollster or a survey designer, decide that for our purposes, these are the cutoffs? And so in this group, you're this generation. In this group, you're that generation. Especially given, again, harkening back to Kim Parker's point, the reason the only census-defined generation is the baby boomers is because it is a measurable and obvious beginning and end of an elevated birth rate. Like, you can see it on the chart. You can also explain it to some degree. It's the end of the Second World War to the beginning of legal contraception.
Right.
Like,
yeah, there's shoulders to it.
Those are the reasons why birth rates would go up and birth rates would go down. But after that, it's just like a little wobbly flat line. Like it's just like a little wobbly flat line that if you pulled out, if you zoomed out the slider bar on the zoom in, zoom out side, it would be just like slightly trending up.
Right. Well, prepare yourself because the demographic cliff is coming, Farrah.
I've heard.
Yeah. For 20 years, they've been telling us. It's coming.
Yes.
Prepare.
Okay.
On 15 here. So this is where they not only have they kind of blurred the definitions of each of these generations, but here they go back to putting them together. So they are separating them in the visual, but the headline and the copy reads that they're the same. Gen Zs and millennials worry that worsening economic conditions may present a setback for work-life balance. And so then for a lot of the rest of this content, it talks about remote work and I mean, it's from Deloitte. They know who their audience is. But it really moves into that space. But I thought this piece was interesting for us to pause on, this idea that like only Gen Zs and millennials worry that a bad economy may present a setback. Like that's kind of not, that's a take more than an insight.
Yes.
That feels like, yeah, that's logical. And when the economy gets bad, everybody tightens their belt.
Yes. Like these things in my mind as a researcher are observation slides. Like, they might start to tilt into take land, but at best they are an observation because there is no point of comparison really. Like they have about the same feelings about these things. So, there's no point within this data of comparing them to each other. And because you have nothing else to compare them to, you only surveyed these two groups, then
Totally.
even calling it two groups is ridiculous. Surveying people between this age and this age, you didn't have anybody in any other age band, and so you can't compare them to anybody else.
Exactly.
The other thing that's not in here, but I bet you lives someplace, and maybe it is, later in the deck or something, but like, if they're doing this in a multi-country study, you want to start looking at differences by country. If it's even just a US-based study, then you want to start looking at other cuts like household income, educational attainment, race and ethnicity, gender, all of those things to start seeing like who's feeling this the most. And it's just very interesting to have this sort of presented as if it were an insight when really it's an observation that may also apply to other groups as equally more, a little more, a little less, a lot more, a lot less, but we don't know that because they didn't ask.
Yeah. And so they don't do a lot of those pieces that I was looking for, although at times they reference gender, they reference LGBTQ or LGBT plus as they call it. They reference ethnic minorities, but they don't define them. And I wonder if they broke that out country by country of who is the ethnic minority. If there's 44 countries in the survey, that would be a pretty wild experiment.
Yeah.
But
imagine the drop-down menus.
What on slide 26, it's 10 slides about remote work is important, and here's the pros and cons of that. I don't think that's all. There's nothing generational about that to me. That is circumstance. But this was interesting. So there's a slide here about harassments and microaggressions are becoming a widespread concern, particularly among Gen Z. And you can see the percentage who experienced harassment at work is higher for Gen Zs compared to millennials. And you can see the breakout of what those are. And then the percentage who experienced microaggressions is pretty similar. I don't think that's a significant difference. But I wonder, like, again, I would love to see this compared to an outside generation or an outside, like a control, because it's kind of like quiet quitting. If someone tells you about it, then you can say, oh, yes, I'm aware of it, and here's 3 examples. But if you've never heard of it, you have no frame of reference. Mm-hmm. And I think there's enough older millennials and Gen Xers who wouldn't know what a microaggression is necessarily, that they wouldn't know if they've experienced one or if it's a concern for them.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what it is.
I would love to see the list of harassment behaviors that they asked about, because clearly there was a battery here.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've
offensive. Yeah, and so they showed you the ones that were top. Now, this is interesting because you're talking about around 1 in 5 Gen Zs saying that they've experienced these, and so that's not small. It's not the majority, but it's not small. So 51% is the totaled up number of you selected anything. My guess is you selected anything from this list. You did not
Right.
select none of the above or don't know.
That's where I
And
was going
so,
next. So
yes.
then you already
So,
have 19, 17, and 16 here.
right. And so the thing about these that's so interesting is that these are um, vague terms, and I don't want to I don't want to suggest that harassment or microaggressions aren't happening in workplaces,
They
but
are.
how people perceive what is a microaggression or what is harassment varies over time because
Yes.
cultural standards change. And so a suggestive email, that feels like one that could be more like, I don't know. I think I would have to like sexually suggestive, like suggestive of what? But let's assume that what they mean is sexually suggestive emails or other communications. Um, First of all, I would not be surprised if there is actually an uptick in those types of things just because of the multiple channels by which people communicate with each other in the workplace now. And people then believing that like the internal WhatsApp or the DM in Slack is private when it's not. Something they wouldn't do in email, they would do in some other
Right.
channel. Um, I'm willing to buy that for sure. But offensive is one of those things where, like, if you showed that statement to certain, let's say, boomers, they would sort of roll their, and Gen Xers for that matter, would sort of roll their eyes and go, "What do you mean by offensive?
Right.
Offensive to whom? You know, whatever." And so it's a very subjective. I don't want to say it's vague. It's subjective. So it's in the eye of the respondent, and you don't really know what it means. But let's set aside the harassment behaviors because those statements are a little more clear of like approaches or physical advances. Yes, obviously tilting into harassment territory. Physical contact, again, they're using sanitized language. Like I would probably use more colloquial language for some of these things, but it also may be that this is like not the actual language they tested. They don't put the question format or any of the options
I
on the
know.
slide, so I
I
don't know
was
what they
thinking I
really
would love
asked.
to see what the actual question is and how the battery was presented.
Yes. And if they're also doing it in 40 countries, is it the same battery? I don't know. But so regardless, set aside the harassment one. The microaggressions one is more interesting because this is literally language that was introduced into the discourse like in the last 7 years, maybe 10.
Right.
Boomers wouldn't know what you're talking about. What's a microaggression? And then I look at some of the things here about unwanted jokes at my expense, excluded from informal interactions or conversations. I guess when I was first introduced to the idea of microaggressions, they were when I was first introduced to them, this was a term that was specific to race. And so it was things like, I don't come out and say something racist to you, but I imply racist ideas through
Yeah,
something subtle that I say or do.
my behavior or
Yes. So
I talk
like
around it. Yeah.
a microaggression would be, a white woman touching a black woman's hair without her permission and then saying something even complimentary or, whatever, saying something stupid, most likely. But like that would be a microaggression because it's not really like, I mean, I guess it's technically physical contact, but it wouldn't be seen as harassment because the sexual is silent. It's like, it was a very specific kind of thing. But excluded from informal interactions or conversations is interesting because I have done a fair number of like team building workshops with clients over the years. And the thing that I have noticed more and more and more is two things. The smaller the organization, the faster people get promoted, even when they're not ready to be promoted.
Yeah. Out of necessity.
When you get promoted from a fairly junior position where you have not been in a leadership position and you have not managed other people to being in a position where the team's still too small for you to be managing other people, but you are now expected to be in a leadership position, there's sort of like an idea, and I don't think this is new. I don't think it's specific to Gen Z at all. There's just this like, why am I not automatically taken more seriously?
Yeah.
And it's like, because 5 minutes ago you were junior, they were giving you stuff to do, and now you're leading the meeting, but you don't actually have the skills to lead the meeting yet.
Right.
And so, and I'm not even saying like it's not like a personality problem. It's like they literally don't know how to lead a meeting.
Oh, trust takes time. You got to build it.
Yes. And then they also have associations about what makes someone senior or junior that are toxic and stupid. So like an example I often use is like, I will wind up, talking to someone in preparation for one of these team building workshops where a junior person has been promoted into a middle management position. They are now responsible for running a particular meeting with people who are more experienced than them and older than them, as well as people who are about their age, all up and down that spectrum. They think because it is their meeting and they are leading the meeting that they should not have to take notes in the meeting. And some of this is because those senior people, particularly the men, particularly the white men in the meeting, don't take notes. And so the signal is, if you get to be senior, you don't have to take notes anymore. That's how you know you've become senior. And I just tell all of them about Richard Branson, who famously takes notes in all meetings.
Oh, yeah.
He does not wait for someone else to take notes. He takes his own notes. Like, you want to be a leader? You want to know what happened in the meeting? Take notes. Who cares who takes the notes? Like, the thing is not to put yourself in the position of only being the note taker and handing over the reins of the meeting to everybody else. It's not about the note taking.
Right.
I think the excluded from informal interactions or conversations question is especially interesting in this era of work from home, where it's very easy to be excluded from
It's
informal
harder to be
interactions.
included. Yeah.
Yes. And so, like, if they're feeling that, is that really about microaggressions, or is that about managers not being very good at managing hybrid and remote teams,
And
which is
who
a
are those
real
managers,
problem?
by the way? What generation would we say those are?
I mean,
Millennials
they're a
and Gen X
combination
and
of
Boomers.
millennials and Gen Xers and Boomers, yes,
Yeah.
who all had to go to the office
So
for many years.
we would need to see the comparison for it to make for this context to make sense, because looking at the bar charts here, the Gen Z group has experienced all these things more, or they've perceived that they've experienced all these things more across the board. And that to me is like, there's probably something wrong with this question.
Yes. Well, and also, like, I would just also add, like, we work with a wide variety of clients. I have a team of people who work with me on those projects. From time to time, a client will forget to CC me on something. And it's annoying because I'm the one who actually has to weigh in on what we're doing here. And if nothing else, I'm the one who needs to know what was discussed, because it's my company. And like, it's going to affect the scope I'm going to give you. Like, these sidebar conversations are unhelpful, but I would not categorize them all as microaggressions. So again, without having some qual to follow up on this, I don't know if people are just picking that as like, yes, that has happened to me, and then Deloitte is characterizing it as microaggressions, or if the question's set up. Microaggressions are, and here's a definition of microaggressions. Here are some examples of microaggressions. Please select all that you have experienced in the last time period.
Yeah. Yeah.
But without knowing the instrument, I don't know. Again, these numbers are fascinating because, 2 out of 5 of Gen Z are saying that they have experienced microaggressions at work in the last 12 months. And, let's see, 13 plus 9 is 21 plus 10 is 31. Like, what's the fourth one?
Right. Totally.
And like, the one that would be the most obviously in what I was first introduced to the term microaggressions to mean, which would be patronized, undermined by leaders based on gender or based on race or something else. That one is, they're all about the same, but it is lower than excluded from informal interactions or conversations, which is probably happening to you, at least in part because you're 21.
Yeah. So they're using this data to make this case that work is less important. It's not as important to their identity. They're more, either they have been harassed and picked on, or they perceive that they are more harassed or harassed more frequently. And
there's
so
one other thing. There's one other option here, which is a longstanding thing also in other kinds of gender-based assault, for example, is that as culture evolves, people are more likely to report these things. They're more likely to understand that that's what they are, and then they're more likely to report over time. And so you do have things like, rape statistics appear to go up when law enforcement actually bothers to record them.
Mm-hmm. It does help if they record it.
Yeah.
They do break out harassment reporting by gender. That's the only thing I think they break out by gender. It's on 27. And I don't really know what to make of that in terms of the narrative they're trying to craft of the generation.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, there are things that, maybe you could make some kind of evolutionary argument of women are being harassed a little less. Men are being harassed a little more, or fewer women are reporting, more men are reporting.
Yeah. I don't know the answer.
Fewer Gen Zs are reporting overall than millennials who are reporting, because this one is about their likelihood to report harassment, and then that's broken out. The other thing that's interesting is, like, this is not a surprise in talking to people in the non-binary, the non-binary cohort, that like more of them are not reporting. Things are already fraught. And so that doesn't surprise me there. That number I would expect to see over time probably go down. But right now, it's about where I'd expect.
Yeah, I would hope. But the other interesting thing is when they break out by generation and then by gender identity, there is no non-binary category in their millennial findings. They don't report any. So they have 4 categories for Gen Z, including non-binary, and they have 3 for millennials.
Yes. So apparently it says here in the footnote, non-binary millennials' base size is too small to report. They only had 8.
Yeah.
Now, again, I have some very big questions about like, so what's the total sample size of this slide?
Right. Like, the Gen Z side that is reportable is only 68.
Is only 68. So this can't be across all countries. This has to be US? And then what was the sample size for that?
Oh, for the entire study? I mean, the entire study.
No. Like, I mean, I don't think we need to break down this study to that degree on methodology. What I think is interesting is, like, so just as like a kind of context setting thing, reports like these are what are often referred to as, like, well, it's like public research. Sometimes it's syndicated research. Probably, you've got Deloitte Touche Tomatsu Limited, which is a division of Deloitte Consulting. Probably what happened here is a bunch of their clients pooled some money, paid Deloitte is the right way of putting it, paid Deloitte to study this so that they could get access to actual crosstabs to get into the nitty-gritty of the data, or to look at a particular industry segment or a particular country, or to ask specific questions. They probably got to contribute questions they wanted answers to. And then this is the public-facing report that Deloitte is effectively using to get more clients to pay for this type of research, and also to hire them to help them figure out what to do about, discrimination in the workplace, or, Gen Zs in the workplace, or whatever. And so this is marketing material. And that doesn't mean it's poorly conducted research. I have no idea, based on this, enough about how they conducted the research to be able to tell you whether it was good research or not. It's probably fine, but it's reported in such a way that it's really hard to parse. Like, it cannot be that only 8 people in the millennial age cohort are non-binary. But I don't know how they ask this question. Like, there are some very specific ways to ask this question.
Yeah.
And, like, if you're not asking it that way, then you're getting weird results. Because, my expectation is, if I'm given a choice of, like, women, female, male, non-binary, did not respond, whatever, that some amount, and then I would also really hope that LGBT is asked separately from gender, because it's not a gender. But, like, within female and male, there are trans people. So the other thing we can't say is that all of those non-binary people are trans. They aren't.
Mhm.
And we can't say for sure that all of the women and men are cisgendered. And so this is just like, I just want to pause here for a moment because we ask this question in a very specific way in all of our screeners so that we can fairly represent people. And the thing I will tell you is millennial, Gen X, Gen Z, we see a pretty consistent 2% who are who do consider themselves to be non-binary or trans, depending on how we ultimately ask the question.
Mhm.
And so like that number is pretty steady, and it isn't necessarily still the full number, but it's interesting that they just left them off for millennials. And so I don't know what to make about that, except I'm curious about how they ask the question. I'm not sure this is the thing you were trying to drive to, though. Like the question of how to ask about gender
Well,
identities.
no, but it's a useful diversion because it speaks to a couple of things. One, that the challenge of doing a study this broad and
Mhm.
presenting it as like all these hot takes and observations and insights, wherever they fall in the tiering. But
But
then
even at the headline level, this less likely to report harassment to their employers, I would be surprised if that headline would not apply to Gen X and boomers as well. Like women being
yeah,
less likely to report harassment to their employers, but also like less likely than
then what?
whom?
Right. And so, well, I think they're saying less likely than men.
Mm-hmm.
No,
I think that's what they must mean.
no, because
Like the did
Gen
not
Z
report of
men,
men is 12%. But that's fewer that did not report.
right? It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
And so they're suggesting a comparison, but there is not a comparison.
No.
And then, but you're right. I don't want to take apart this single slide, but this slide and the questions you've asked illustrate again for us. Like I think our listeners know you can't study something this big. Our first questions are instinctively like, oh, you're in 44 countries, then let's look geographically. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're in 44 countries, let's look by gender. Holy moly, 44 countries, that's amazing. Like let's look at just city centers versus rural.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ways to cut it, but instead it's this presented view of the big swings, the takes, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, and they're not compelling.
No.
In the millennial story, they were presented as very compelling hot takes. The millennials want X or Y. They're they behave in these broad ways.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty mild findings.
Yes. And I think this gets to what a lot of these stories are like. Like you get to paragraph 3 and you find out that what the headline is representing is not really what the data show.
Yeah,
And the one I think about there is the one about let's see if I can find it over here. Like there were there was this one that was in Fortune. It was titled Gen Z and Young Millennial Employees Are Missing the Equivalent of One Day's Work Every Week Due to Mental Health Concerns,
yes,
Research Shows.
yes.
Now, the first thing is this is in the UK. And so they are missing the equivalent of a day's work every week due to mental health struggles. That's the lead. Then it says, analysis by Vitality, the health and life insurer with over 30 million members worldwide, found that the average worker in the UK feels unable to work for almost 50 days a year, costing the British economy a staggering £138 billion. Feels unable is not the same thing as did not come to
Doesn't
work.
work. Yeah.
The estimation of lost productivity is probably about a correlation of hours worked by employees to profit or revenue, which is how like the
Right.
Bureau of Labor Statistics looks at it. So they went ahead and did that math as if these people did not come to work, but they do come to work. They just don't feel good. And again, what I would like to say is thank you for being honest.
Right. I like the way the life insurer sponsor of the research is credited with the scale of their operation as well in the introductory sentence. That's like, this study is brought to you by
Uh-huh.
terrible, absolutely terrible. But and so then the finding becomes very mild when you really dig into it, and like this Deloitte study, like that vitality study, and like most of these studies, someone picks up the hot take headline or subhead, and then that becomes the basis for the Axios article, or less likely Axios runs with bad stuff, but like Forbes definitely does, and the New York Post definitely will.
Yes.
To make their case that all of a sudden elevates it from observation to hot take for sure. That is,
Yes.
Gen Z bad.
Well, and the way that they there's actually, again, way more interesting information deeper down into the article. And so one of them is like, they are reporting productivity dips, they're reporting depression, they're reporting elevated levels of burnout and fatigue. They're more likely to say so than their older counterparts. And again, I don't know how much of this is because they're actually more burned out or because they're more willing to say that they're burned out. Or that they're willing to cop to being burned out. Like, I think, I recently had a realization that I think I burned out sometime back in 2019, and it took me until now to realize it. And so like, but one of the things that they also say is that people who earn less, so make less than 30,000 pounds, about $38,000 US, feel 86% more neglected by their workplace than higher income colleagues. And that's probably also an accurate reflection of things.
That's the story, though.
Yes. The young workers, almost
are
by
not
definition,
getting the resources and
make
support
less
they need.
and don't get the resources and support that they need. And so then it gets like, but the kind of punchline to that first section of the article is essentially for 54 days a year, Gen Zers clock in but achieve zilch due to mental hurdles and a reluctance to seek help from higher ups.
You know what they're doing, Farrah? They're quiet quitting.
They're quiet quitting. No, but it's also like a little bit of a blame game. Like, hey, we're offering you these wellness tools and only a quarter of you are actually using them.
Right.
And it's like, okay, but like, again, I have worked on projects related to like support tools and wellness tools, both in higher ed and in corporations. And they're often things like, we will subsidize your gym membership and you get a free Headspace subscription. But it's not like, I mean, and again, the other thing I would say is, I don't know that I would use... Like, those are probably two things I would take you up on because they would cut my costs of doing things. But I am not going to like go to HR when I feel sad. That sounds like a really good way to not get promoted.
Yeah.
Or
taken seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we have like an underlying question here is, do I trust my employer to offer me wellness tools? And is that what I want from my employer? When I say I'm feeling neglected, is what I'm looking for a subsidized meditation app, or am I looking for mentorship, training, a better vacation package, more sick days,
to be taken seriously,
better health insurance, being taken seriously? Like, now this is the UK, they have the NHS. It's a different sort of deal there. But like, also in this era of work from home, are you making me commute from the outer boroughs into London every day?
Yeah.
That might be a reason why I feel neglected.
But I also, you look, so I brought a study from Deloitte. You brought a Forbes article that references a study done by a huge insurer. Mm-hmm. It is positioned as us versus them. It is positioned as understanding for control. Why can't you be profitable? Because 1 in 5 days are skipped. Why can't you be profitable? Because these people are more likely to report harassment and microaggressions. It's like, I'm not sure these things add up in the way that you want them to be perceived.
Well, and we have these also like spate of stories about Gen Z graduating from college without, this is a headline from Fortune also, without the right behavioral and emotional skills for the workplace. And this is in part hinged on the investor Bill Ackman's constant fight against Harvard because he gives them money and so thinks he ought to be able to run the college. But like there is this. It is like a metastasized version of the same story that we heard about millennials after they'd entered the workforce, and they were like, "You're really hard and whiny and ask a lot of questions," and like. So like we're just straight out of the gate with it. And so then you get this article from a website called Higher Ed Dive that says 31% of hiring managers say they steer clear of Gen Z. And the subhead is Gen Z members spent college predominantly in remote or hybrid settings, impacting their ability to hone crucial workplace skills, one expert said. Now, again, my question is, all right, hiring managers, how many entry-level positions do you have open? Are you hiring entry-level people?
Right.
Are you steering clear of Gen Z because they're not qualified for the roles?
Yeah.
Like, but also like nearly all respondents reported a Gen Z candidate acting inappropriately during an interview. But
compared to what though?
Well, but okay, that's the lead sentence in the paragraph in the bullet point. Gen Z applicants ask for too much money. That's inappropriate.
It's a shocking affront.
Inappropriate behavior is asking for more money than you want to pay them. That's not inappropriate behavior, babies. I'm sorry. Like, that's not.
So when you turn the lazy Susan of the story, again, it's, oh, these workers come acting inappropriately without the skills of the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Or, no, spin it a quarter turn. The workplace is not equipped to serve people who know what they want or who ask what they want or behave differently than the group of people that have been there already.
Yeah.
Like you
and this is
people halfway.
This is the other thing that is like the flip side of this stuff. Like, so this is a survey by resumebuilder.com. So also like, let's just be clear about who the sponsor of the research is.
Their bona fides are well known.
Yeah, a well-respected research firm. Managers filling entry-level positions say they avoid hiring Gen Z in favor of older workers. And I just want to say this on behalf of the older workers. I don't want your entry-level position. Right? Like why on earth would you hire a 30-year-old with 7 years of work experience to be in an entry-level position? Unless they are switching careers and industries, why would you hire someone that old to be in that role? They're going to quit in this economy. Like, they're going to quit. And so you should put entry-level people in entry-level positions because that's where they should be. And then you should train them and mentor them and figure out how to meet their needs in the workforce so that, you know, you're not having to 30% say they had to fire a Gen Z worker within a month of their start date. But my reaction to that is you are very bad at your jobs.
Yes, totally. And it's not based on their age or their generation, which is even worse. It's not age, it's their generation. So it's not just that they're 22 and it's their first job. It is because they're Gen Z, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But you got to be able to onboard a 22-year-old or a 32-year-old or a 42-year-old, and you can't leave it up to chance that based on their generational behaviors, they're either going to make it or not. How can a company scale? Imagine a company like Meta adopting 5% of what this crazy survey asserts. It doesn't make any sense.
No. But the good news is apparently 45% of respondents in this study said that they're offering etiquette classes. And another 18% are going to this year. So,
and are the etiquette classes for the young workers or for the managers to stop microaggressions?
Hilarious. It's for the young workers.
Yeah, of
they
course.
Don't know how to make eye contact, Adam.
Yeah, they're digital natives. That's why. That's my favorite go-to. I'm going to try to say that in every episode of season 2.
I don't think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be super easy. Digital natives.
You're right.
But I think you have actually alighted on something really important, which is that we really emphasized with millennials in particular, the importance of STEM skills, STEM jobs, being online, being on computers, having smartphones. Like,
the way of the future.
You don't want to have your kid having FOMO because all their friends have a phone, they don't have a phone, moral panics and concerns about if they don't have a phone, how will I reach them in the inevitable event of a mass shooting in a school? All of those kinds of concerns have made it so that, they're glued to devices all of the time. And they've spent most of college or half of college, half of high school on Zoom calls because of the pandemic. So
Right.
yeah, maybe they don't know where to look.
Yeah, even as we're talking, I'm looking up and down at the camera and then at your eyes on the screen.
Yes. No, I'm looking back and forth between the text and then also
Right.
like, is my hair doing anything crazy? And then I'm looking back to see if your hair is doing anything crazy. And like round and
My
round I
hair.
go. I don't know where to look either. Now,
It
when I
always
get into
is.
a room with a person, I'm not having a hard time figuring out what I'm supposed to look at
But I
because hopefully
am.
I don't have a screen in front of me.
Plus, but in my workplace, it's not unusual to open a laptop and be taking notes.
Yes.
And someone else joins via Zoom, or we tag someone else in via Zoom.
Yep.
And we want to do that because we want to make it inclusive. We want people to hear the conversation firsthand. I want their insight added. I don't want to have a second meeting, God forbid.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
So I could see someone being frustrated even with me. I'm Gen X, by the way, for having the same kind of reported
And your
behavior.
name is Adam Pierre now?
That's correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
good. Just wanted to check.
Still.
Still Adam Pierre.
I wish I was a Jordan Catalano, but can't win
Leave it
them all,
with me.
baby. Yeah, can't win them all. So I think we can pack this one up, Farrah. I think we're not done with this by a long shot. We're going to start looking at some writing on Gen Alpha at some point during this season as well.
Yes.
So we can go back.
I'm going to introduce you to this totally different generation, completely different narrative from all other youth generations prior to
Different
it.
observations and takes about.
Totally
Although the
different.
headline is the same. Here comes Gen Alpha. It's the same.
Nothing ever changes.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. But it's fun to figure that out.
But I think it is also important for people who are reading these takes because I will candidly tell you that in like Apple News, I set up like a feed for millennials, Gen
Google
Z,
alert. Yeah.
that sort of thing. And I open that, I scroll through that part of the app every other day, and I am just dispirited by how much there is. It feels right now, I feel personally attacked. It feels like an onslaught of these stories. And maybe it's because like they kind of petered out on talking about millennials because they're newly olds. And like, oh, wait, we rested up over the holidays and we're coming back
we got a new group to hate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's get after it.
Do you find in your feed in my Google alerts there's a lot of Australian reporting on workplace behavior among Gen Zs and millennials?
So
I see a lot.
I actually think we should do an Australian episode, and I'm going to reach out to a couple of people I know in Australia to see if they would like to talk to us about this problem, because the avocado toast meme originates with an Australian real estate developer who believed that millennials were spending all their money on avocado toast and therefore not buying homes. But also, very importantly, the guy who invented avocado toast was himself Australian. So this was like an Australian cafe trend that this guy who wanted people to buy his luxury condos latched onto. So much of the millennial industrial complex is Australian. And then to say nothing of the Rupert Murdoch element of the whole thing.
We do talk about the Post an outsized amount on this.
It's true.
Fox Business.
The Murdoch properties really love to hate on young people.
Yeah.
And for obvious reasons, I suppose.
It's good for business there.
It is. So we should do an Australia episode, is what I think.
Let's do it.
Gen Z.
Right now, there's an entire island of people, an island continent saying we don't say Zed.
Yeah, I think they do. But yes, after this, I'm gonna DM my friend Anna from Perth and ask her who she thinks we should talk to.
Excellent.
It's gonna be great.
All right, onward and upward.
You say so.
I guess it's more like a straight line.
Just onward.
We're gonna keep on moving.
It's gonna be like the population trend line. It's just gonna be like a little bit wiggly, flat, slightly trending upward line, but still trending upward.
Until
the cliff.
The demographic.
The demographic cliff.
Yeah. That's the age with boomers.
That'll be season 3, the demographic cliff.
I mean, I hope they're wrong. But they've been
or maybe no, that'll be our final episode.
It's like the Toonsis the Driving Cat. It's just like us going over the cliff, screaming for 30 minutes.
Google it, kids. Toonsis.
All right. Another timely reference. Yeah.
Exactly.
Really crushing it.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Great to see you.
Bye.
In the Demo is written and hosted by Farrah Bostic and Adam Pierno, with support from the Difference Engine. Edited by Allison Preisinger and Amp Studio, with production support from Ashley Darrington. Music used with permission by Omega Man under the Creative Commons license. Go to inthedemopodcast.com for behind-the-scenes research, supporting information, and transcripts. If you'd like to support the show, please rate, review, and share the show with people you think will appreciate it. Thanks for listening.